After 3 mock drafts and probably 1 or 2 more before the actual 2026 NFL draft in late April, I wanted to talk about specific scenarios and ways I could see the first round of the 2026 NFL draft play out. We spend months doing mock drafts, and as much as I love mock drafts, I wanted to go into a little bit more detail on some of the potential selections. Today, we're going to go through picks 17 through 32 and talk about the potential candidates for each team if they stick and pick. Part 1 I've already done for picks 2 through 16. If you haven't seen that, go check that out if you have a team that you prefer or your favorite team's selections are in that range, or if your team's first selection is in that range, Cowboys, Browns, Dolphins, and Chiefs fans. So, this is Son of a Sports, and today, let's talk about the 2026 NFL Draft. Our first team up today is the Detroit Lions at pick 17, and the positions I picked are left tackle, corner, edge rusher, and defensive tackle. The prospects, Ronald Freeling, Spencer Fano, I think those two are the dream fits for what Detroit is looking for. Vega Ioane, Caleb Banks, Jermon McCoy, Mansour Delane, and Avion Terrell I also mentioned because of their corner depth and because of their need for a full long-term corner and something they've been rotating at for years now because of health issues, because their draft picks haven't worked out or the free agent signings haven't fully worked out. They've had a lot of issues at corner. Anyways, but Monroe Freeling and Spencer Fano, those two are what Detroit is hoping to God for after the cutting of Taylor Decker, after just needing a long-term fit at left tackle. Fano played left tackle early in college, but he could also play right tackle, and you could move Penei Sewell to left tackle, and Freeling is the best pure left tackle in this draft class. If one of those two makes it to 17, I think Detroit could really just thank God. And I think there's also a world where Detroit considers trading up for one of these two players, because it's certainly a possibility that Detroit says, we need this more than anything else in the world, and we'd give up another pick to just go out and do it. Minnesota at 18. Corner, safety, tight end, and defensive tackle I mentioned, but I mean, the 3 prospects that are first on this list are the 3 that have been connected to Minnesota for months. Dylan Thieneman, Emmanuel McNeil-Warren, and Avion Terrell. Over and over again, these 3 will be mentioned with Minnesota, and it's for a good reason. They need some secondary help. They need more depth in their secondary, and they can get really creative with one of these 3 prospects. Terrell can play in the slot. He can play in the boundary. Emmanuel McNeil-Warren and Dylan Thieneman, you could put at any safety position or in the nickel position. It's something that Brian Flores can get really creative with, and since the Combine, Thieneman has been the most connected prospect to Minnesota, the most mocked prospect to Minnesota, and it's for good reason. So that's why I named only 5 for Minnesota at 18. And I'm probably going to name a lot more for each and every other team because it kind of feels like these are the only guys connected to Minnesota throughout the entire process. For the Carolina Panthers, I named tight end, linebacker, corner, wide receiver, and defensive tackle. And I named a million prospects because Carolina's free agency really put them in a position where they can take whoever they like at this pick. They don't have to hope CJ Allen falls to them. They don't have to reach on a receiver if the top 3 are off the board. They can go with anyone they like. Kenyon Sadiq, Jordan Tyson, Casey Concepcion, Omar Cooper Jr., CJ Allen. These 5 players have been really mocked to the Panthers over the last few weeks. And Caden McDonald, and Caleb Banks, and Cassius Howe before they signed Jalen Phillips. Keldrick Falk even. Avion Terrell is something that I've seen Panthers blogs now talk about. It is really interesting what the Panthers can go with at this pick, and I think it's going to be among these players that I'm showing on the board. Kenyon Sadiq is a real possibility for them at 19 now, with Philadelphia re-signing Dallas Goedert, sort of indicating how people are feeling where Sadiq will go, and that's in the top 20. It's really hard to gauge tight end value, but if there's a team that's really put themselves in a position where they can take whoever they want, it is Carolina. Dallas's second first-round pick. Their free agency actually put it to where they have to take a specific position here, depending on how 12 goes. Corner, safety, edge rusher, linebacker, still the same needs. The prospects, Dylan Thieneman, Emmanuel McNeil-Warren. I think Dallas could have taken one of those 2 players there if they didn't strike out in the entire linebacker market. And they might also just not take a linebacker here. They might have to take an edge rusher as well. So that's why I mentioned Keldrick Falk again and TJ Parker, 2 players that have been mocked a lot to Dallas at 20. It has mostly been between the linebacker and edge rusher position for mocks for Dallas over the last few weeks because of how Dallas struck out in free agency with those 2 positions. I also have to mention corner if Dallas doesn't target one at 12. If a Sonny Styles or Caleb Downs makes it to Dallas at 12, I think an Avion Terrell or Jermon McCoy is certainly possible for Dallas at 20. Again, Dallas is one of those teams that I know there's some people that praise their free agency, but it wasn't ideal. They struck out in the linebacker market. The edge rusher group is not great. It might be worse than last year's, and they're left to figure out 3 positions in the NFL draft, or they'll all be at the bottom of the league again. The Pittsburgh Steelers at 21. I mentioned quarterback, wide receiver, offensive guard / tackle because of Broderick Jones' future there, linebacker, and cornerback. So the prospects, Vega Ioane, a really, really growing prospect for Pittsburgh over the last few weeks, something that's become more ideal since the departure of Isaac Sumalau in free agency. Ty Simpson, I mean, this is the first Ty Simpson team I mentioned. I think it's certainly a possibility for Pittsburgh at 21. Aaron Rodgers' future. I mean, if he plays, it's probably one more year. Will Howard was a 6th-round pick. I mean, they don't really have a full-term answer for quarterback in the long term, especially under new coach Mike McCarthy. Wide receiver, another position that has been really mocked for the Steelers. I know they signed Michael Pittman, but this still could be a possibility. Jordan Tyson, Omar Cooper Jr., Casey Concepcion, 3 real possibilities for them. CJ Allen, wanted to mention that. They've been reportedly talking about trading Patrick Queen. They also, Peyton, what's his last name? Wasn't very good for them last year. Peyton Wilson wasn't very good. He really declined last year in his second year in the league. Avion Terrell and Jermon McCoy also had to mention, and then another offensive lineman in Caden Proctor. I like the idea of Proctor a little bit because Roger Jones might not be ready to start the year, and you could potentially have Caden start at tackle, then move to guard, or start at guard, then move to tackle. You could get really creative with him because his NFL long-term position is not fully set yet. Chargers at 22. I named wide receiver, offensive guard, edge rusher, defensive tackle, and corner. I don't think wide receiver is the biggest need in the world, but I wanted to mention it with some connection there. I also wanted to mention Kenyon Sadiq in my list of prospects because of Daniel Jeremiah's connection there to the Chargers organization and how he mentioned him in a mock draft recently. But the prospects, Vega Ioane, Akeem Mesidor, TJ Parker, Keldrick Falk. I feel like that's the top 4 for what the Chargers are looking at number 22. I think guard is still in play, but I think the most important thing they've set themselves up for is edge rusher and free agency. People connected to the organization have kind of pointed in that direction, and how their free agency went, I think, points to that direction. Mentioned Kenyon Sadiq, Omar Cooper Jr., Casey Concepcion. Also mentioned corner a little bit because I think they could use more depth there. Avion Terrell, Jermon McCoy for sure. And Caden Proctor because of the patellar injury that Rashawn Slater had last training camp, or the injury he did have. They've always had issues with their tackles and health over the last few years. If they had Proctor, they could play him at guard, then try him at tackle, and have someone that could be flexible at both positions. I named Ioane first because, they've had so many issues in their interior offensive line over the last few years. Their entire interior offensive line will be brand new starters going into next season, but it's still important to mention. And I think edge rusher, like I said, I think it's the position that the Chargers have set themselves up for in this draft that they probably are going to target the most, but yeah, they can go anywhere. Number 23, Philadelphia. Wide receiver, edge rusher, cornerback, right tackle. I named wide receiver because of the looming talk of an A.J. Brown trade, and because I think a wide receiver 3 is still beneficial for this team. Edge rusher, their depth there has gotten thinner over the last few years. Certainly a position that they could look at here. Corner, I think it's also a mention because I know they signed Tariq Woolen, but I don't think it changes their long-term plans for another boundary corner opposite of Kenyon Mitchell. And then right tackle. Lane Johnson could retire in a year now. So Blake Miller, Caden Proctor. I know Caden's a left tackle, but if they sit him for the first year of his career and have him develop and grow behind Lane, I think that's certainly a possibility. Avion Terrell at corner. I think they could get really creative with him and Vic Fangio. Defensive end, TJ Parker, Keldrick Falk. Parker was once viewed as one of the top prospects in this draft early in the season, and it could be certainly something Philly targets and says, well, the talent is there. Let's just get the best of it, and then he's suddenly an all-pro in a few years, and you're like, wow, how did that happen? Same thing with Peter Woods. Had to mention him as well. With some rumors of a Jalen Carter trade at one point, and, they've paid Jordan Davis. Maybe Carter's not in their long-term plans. We'll see. Falk, I also think is really interesting. They could develop in Philly. Casey Concepcion would be an amazing fit next to A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith if they kept Brown. I think that'd be a really good fit. And then Kenyon Sadiq, if he made it to 23, I think Philly would 100% consider that. They could be more physical, play more 12-man personnel, and they could also have a better blocker than Dallas Goedert. And Goddard's only on a 1-year deal and in his 30s. Philly can get really creative with this pick. I know that they lost in the first round last year, but they still have an incredibly talented roster. And they could go for the future. They could have someone just sit and develop, or they could just get a playmaker right away. Cleveland's second first-round pick. I kind of went with the same thing as before. I have to mention left tackle and wide receiver. Again, it's whether they take one or the other first, but I'm going to name the prospects that are here for Cleveland. Caleb Lomu is certainly a possibility here at 24. I should have mentioned Lomu for the Lions as well, because that is another prospect for them that they might have to reach on. Caden Proctor, another one that I think that they could look at. Omar Cooper Jr. is a favorite of mine to pick for Cleveland if they go with Monroe Freeling at 6. Casey Concepcion, Jordan Tyson. Mel Kiper had it to where Mekhi Lemon made it to 24, and I've seen some others have it to where Jordan Tyson makes it to 24. Had to mention Jordan Tyson because he's the one with a little bit more concerns in the process than Mekhi Lemon. And then Denzel Boston, just naming the receiver group. It depends on what they go with the formula here. It's whether left tackle or wide receiver goes first, and then second, which one goes second. For the Chicago Bears at 25, I put left tackle, safety, edge rusher, and defensive tackle. I mentioned left tackle because of the patellar injury Ozzy Trupillo had last year in the playoff game against the Packers. So I put Caleb Lomu and Caden Proctor there. I don't necessarily think that it's a foregone conclusion they take left tackle at 25. I think it's a conversation to be had. I also think that the possibility of a Dylan Thieneman and Emmanuel McNeil-Warren at 25 I think that is a real possibility as well, considering the departures they had at safety in this offseason and how they've set things up to where they could probably target a box safety in this draft class. I think it's a real possibility for Chicago, and I think it would be a massive upgrade to the secondary they had last year. I also want to mention defensive line because of the need for talent there, the need for a full-time playmaker. TJ Parker, Caleb Banks, Peter Woods, Kaden McDonald. These three positions or three groups, I think, are the biggest things Chicago is going to be connected through until draft night, through the draft weekend, and all of that. I think it's a real possibility Chicago takes any of these players. At 26, we have Buffalo, and first of all, this logo looks incredible. I have to give credit. Like, if any of these teams have like a great logo or something, it's more likely than not because of their media teams. Just want to point that out. If it's a team that doesn't have like a good logo or something's up, it's because your team didn't have specific logos out there. And if it was because your team did, i.e. Dallas Cowboys, you had no media out there from the team. Sorry. Positions: edge rusher, wide receiver, safety, corner, linebacker. I don't think Buffalo really addressed their big needs this offseason outside of the trade for DJ Moore, and even then it still feels like an overpay a little bit. And I don't think the Bradley Chubb signing changes anything. I still think that these are the prospects they're going to look at. Cassius Howe, that's something I've really liked for them over the last few weeks. DJ Parker, Emmanuel McNeil-Warren, if he makes it to 26, Avion Terrell, Caleb Banks, CJ Allen, Omar Cooper Jr., and Casey Concepcion. I think all of these prospects are a real possibility for Buffalo. I think it's going to be best player on the board for them. And their roster's in such a weird position, and it's all run by the guy that kind of put them in this weird position. And they moved on from the guy that was carrying them out of this weird position, or one of the guys in Coach Sean McDermott. San Francisco at 27, tackle, safety, corner, defensive line, and wide receiver. I've seen someone comment on my mock draft that they don't believe that San Francisco needs an offensive lineman, that they won't go with offensive lineman at 27, but I think it's a possibility. I think Caleb Lomu, Caden Proctor, and Blake Miller are all possibilities for San Francisco at 27. I know that there's people that think other than that, but I think it's only a possibility because of their needs there. I know that Shanahan doesn't like going offensive line. I've seen 49ers fans pissed about that, but I think it's a possibility. Emmanuel McNeil-Warren, someone that's kind of been connected to San Francisco over the last few weeks. It's hard to gauge safety value, and if he made it to 27, I think it's a real possibility. Casey Concepcion, another popular prospect connected to San Francisco. Omar Cooper Jr., Colton Hood, Avion Terrell. I think there's so many prospects you can go with San Francisco here at 27. Kenyon Sadiq is someone that people have mentioned as well. Don't know if he makes it to 27. I don't think he does. Didn't mention him here because of that. But yeah, San Francisco has addressed so many of their needs over the last few years. It's just the amount of injuries they've had. And I think it's going to be best player available here or best trench player available here. The Houston Texans at 28. It is a typo. I meant to put 28 and I put 27. Crap. Anyways, Houston Texans at 28. Positions: offensive line, linebacker, and defensive tackle. I know they've addressed offensive line a lot in free agency, but I still think going out and getting a young player here to develop is still in the conversation, whether that's Emmanuel Pregnon, Caden Proctor, Max Ironacre. I think all three of these guys could be at positions the Texans target in the long term. Caleb Banks and Caden McDonald are also real possibilities for the Texans here. They have been rotating veterans in the interior defensive line over the last few years, and I think there's a conversation to be had that they just straight up address it in this draft class, and they say, let's just go and get someone that can be permanent here for a while and have someone really just grow and have that early difficult development stage be next to a Will Anderson and a Daniil Hunter. I also wanted to mention linebacker quickly because I think another linebacker next to Al-Shaair is beneficial for this defense. I know that their defense was historic last year, but I think there's a world where they could target another permanent position at linebacker, another player at a, you know what I mean. And that could possibly be CJ Allen, Anthony Hill Jr., if he wanted to go that high, or another in-state linebacker in Jacob Rodriguez. Kansas City's second first-round pick at 29, 20 picks after their first one. Corner, wide receiver, right tackle, edge rusher, named all of them. Edge rusher, I think Akeem Mesidor or Keldrick Falk or Zion Young. If any of them that are there at 29, I think that's a real conversation to be had. It all depends on how Kansas City's first-round pick shakes up, whether that's right tackle, corner, wide receiver. I think that determines how 29 plays out. But I think if Omar Cooper Jr. is there, I think that's another conversation. I think he could help a lot with adding a real dynamicness to Kansas City's offense that they haven't had in the last few years. Colton Hood and Avion Terrell, have to mention with how their corner room has been shaken up this offseason. And then Blake Miller and Max Einaker, two of the best right tackles in this draft class after the first initial group of Francis Mauigoa and Spencer Fano. Miami's second first-round pick at 30. Positions, right tackle / right guard, corner, wide receiver. I've already mentioned the reasons why in my first part, but I mean, I think the offensive line was a thing that the previous regime struggled to build around, and I also think that wide receiver was a need before the trade of Jalen Waddle. And corner, this is one of the worst corner rooms in the entirety of the National Football League. So going through the prospects, Blake Miller, again, going to keep mentioning him for teams that need a right tackle. I think he's going to be very much valued in the lower part of the first round. Caden Proctor, another guy you can get really creative with. I think Max Einaker is in the conversation, but I don't know if this new regime takes someone as raw as him with their second first-round pick. Then the corner group, Colton Hood, Avion Terrell, Brandon Cisse. Could see a Chris Johnson go in this range, maybe a Keith Abney if they value nickel that much. Wide receiver, Omar Cooper Jr., Casey Concepcion, Denzel Boston. I think those are the only wide receivers in the conversation at this point. And then safety, I wanted to mention quickly, if Emmanuel McNeil-Warren makes it here, I think it's another guy in the conversation for Miami. Could be an interesting pick here. But yeah, I think it's the same group of same three positions for Miami at 30 that it would be at 11. The AFC champion New England Patriots at 31, they're in conversations for an A.J. Brown. There's some talks there, but we're going to act like that didn't happen. Positions, right tackle, I think they could target, wide receiver, and edge rusher. Prospects, Blake Miller, Max Einaker, two players you could sit and develop for a year as Morgan Moses plays out his last year with them. Wide receiver, Omar Cooper Jr., Casey Concepcion, Denzel Boston. Again, same thing as Miami. I think that these are the three receivers here that Patriots could really target. Concepcion's one that I've been liking to New England over the last few weeks. Edge rusher, Cassius Howe, Zion Young, and TJ Parker. Have to mention all three of them because I think that there's a real world that the Patriots take one of them here. I know that they signed Draymond Jones this offseason. They let K'Lavon Chaisson leave in free agency. That's why I think they could add some speed like a Zion Young or a Cassius Howe here. Super Bowl champion Seattle Seahawks at 32. Corner, edge rusher, and wide receiver. The corner group being Brandon Cisse, Colton Hood, and Chris Johnson. Edge rusher being TJ Parker, Keldrick Falk. And I wanted to mention Caden McDonald too, because I think there's a world where they could look to take a defensive tackle, have him sit and develop behind a Leonard Williams and Byron Murphy, and get ready for a world where Leonard Williams is no longer a Seahawk and he's no longer in the NFL. And you could have it to where Byron Murphy moves to that 3-tech, McDonald takes the nose tackle role in the long term. And yeah. And then wide receiver, wanted to quickly mention, because I think that they could add more wide receiver talent. I know that they paid Rashid Shaheed. I know they still have Cooper Kupp helping JSN. I still think it's a possibility. Omar Cooper Jr., Casey Concepcion. And then I wanted to put Jadarian Price in this list because this running back draft class isn't ideal. It's just not. And honestly, I think if there was a team to go take a second running back or the second running back in this draft class, it'd have to be Seattle, who lost Super Bowl MVP Kenneth Walker in free agency. Think it's a possibility. Don't know how much of it is, but I mean, if anything's clear out of the combine, or if anything became clear out of the combine in free agency, it's that this running back in free agency class or running back draft class isn't the best in the world. So that's part two. And I understand that there's probably prospects I haven't mentioned for a specific team. I know there's prospects I talked about that somebody's going to get pissed off about their team or a position need. And I understand that, but I'm doing this from the perspective of someone that has made my own opinions, someone that is doing research about how fan bases feel, about how analysts feel, about how the NFL feels about each of these positions, about each of these teams, and about what we're hearing out of the combine, because these are all real possibilities. And more likely than not, I still didn't include a player for each of these teams that's going to get selected by all of them. Like, again, like I mentioned in part one, we didn't know about Michael Penix until the day of the draft, until the draft pick happened, or an Alex Leatherwood or a Clinton Farrell. Things happen, things change that we don't see coming. A Jahmyr Gibbs, a Bijan Robinson, you just don't see it happening. It's a possibility, but it doesn't happen until it happens. Or the Jags taking Travis Hunter, trading up for him. That's why I didn't do trades. But also, I just really enjoy this and didn't think a mock draft would do justice to how many prospects I think about for each team in the first round, or in general, even after that. And I will talk about day 2 prospects and things like that for each team later down the line. I'll talk and probably do another mock draft pretty soon. And I hope all of you enjoyed. I love each and every one of you. And this is one of the best parts of doing this, is talking about the draft. It is one of the best times of the year. NBA playoffs start, NFL drafts around. It's a great time. I love each and every one of you. Like I said, I'll catch y'all next time. This is Son of a Sports. And see you soon.